you guys know Down the Via Dolorosa? Does anyone know that one? Anyone know it? Okay. Well, it'd be nice to learn it, but I don't know if you guys know it. Well, okay. It's quite short, it's not long. Down the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem that day, the soldiers tried to clear the narrow streets, but the crowd pressed in to see the man condemned to die on Calvary. He was bleeding from a beating. There were stripes on his back, and he wore a crown of thorns upon his head. And he bore with every step the scorn of those who cried out for his death. Down the Via Dolorosa, called the way of suffering, like a lamb came the Messiah, Christ the King. But he chose to walk that road out of his love for you and me. Down the Via Dolorosa, all the way to Calvary. Do you guys want to do that again? Okay, let's do it again so we can learn it together. Maybe we can do it next week as well. Yeah. Okay. It's okay. We'll do it again so we can learn it. Try and sing along this time. Down the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem that day, the soldiers tried to clear the narrow streets, but the crowd pressed in to see the man condemned to die on Calvary. He was bleeding from a beating. There were stripes upon his back, and he wore a crown of thorns upon his head. And he bore with every step the scorn of those who cried out for his death. Down the Via Dolorosa, called the way of suffering, like a lamb came the Messiah, Christ the King. But he chose to walk that road out of his love for you and me. Down the Via Dolorosa, all the way to Calvary.
Welcome all. Doesn't that give you Good Friday vibes? We're very, very close to Good Friday. It's actually, 2 weeks? 2 weeks from now will be in Good Friday. So I hope everyone's prepared and has had a blessed time in Lent and had an opportunity to really enjoy this time. Tonight we're blessed with none other but Peter Francis. He's come all the way from Adelaide. He's come, fresh from the airport, so he's come especially for us. So thank you, Peter. But tonight's topic is really, really important, I believe. We're continuing the series of Christ's freedom. And I think this particular topic, if we can master knowing oneself, which is the title of the topic tonight, it paves the way for a lovely relationship with God and a lovely relationship with others. So, and hashtag obviously no filter. Obviously, we want to know ourselves with no filter. We don't want to give the Instagram special. We want to know ourselves completely. So, without further ado, I don't think he needs an introduction, but he can introduce himself both now and afterwards. But I'll give it over to you, Pete. Thanks, mate. Do you have a slide? Do you have something like that?
Thanks for that, Tim. I'm a bit more forceful than Tim, so I'm going to ask everyone to sit in the first 4 rows. Let's see how this goes. Name and shame. Everyone move forward. Come on, guys. I see the Instagram photos of like St. Cosman's youth, and everyone looks so scattered. It's like you either don't like each other or you don't like the speaker. Well, yeah, but that's our... Everyone's sitting like on the 4th row exactly. What's your name? Yana doesn't bite, guys. If you don't want to sit next to her, that's not an issue. Okay. All right, are we ready? Okay. So I'm going to hand out a few references from the beginning of the talk, so it sort of saves us throughout the talk from looking them up. So Joanna, can you pull out Luke chapter 15, verse 11 to 13? Armea, can you pull out Genesis chapter 3, verse 9 to 10? If any of you have to leave in the middle of the talk, just give you a reference to someone else. Tim, can you pull out Genesis 3, 11 to 12? Amanda, Psalm 15, verse 1 to 2. Mariam, Proverbs 28, verse 13. Naomi, Matthew chapter 7, verse 5. Sarah, Proverbs chapter 16, verse 32. This is a lot. Sorry, who's sitting next to Sarah? Clara, nice to meet you. Can you pull out John chapter 8, verse 32? And who's sitting next to Clara? What's your name, sorry? Miriam. Can you pull out John chapter 8, verse 32? Did I already say that? John chapter 8, verse 32. Oh, that was yours. Sorry. Is that it? Okay. I think that's it. What was that? Okay. Does everyone remember their references, or do I have to say it again? You remember? Everyone remembers? Sarah, yours was Proverbs something something. Okay, I'll pull out the something something. I think it was Proverbs 13. Sarah, Proverbs 16, verse 32, and the person before was Naomi, Matthew 7, verse 5. Okay. All right. With that done, let's get started. Everyone remember their references, because I don't want to pull them out again. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So like Tim said before, the topic for tonight is titled hashtag no filter, and it's all about being honest with yourself, and first of all, knowing yourself, and secondly, being honest with yourself. And they're both related. It's based on a series by Amber Yusuf called Honesty with Yourself, and another talk I heard by Abuna Nathaniel Gerges, who's a very awesome speaker in America, and also a book titled The 12 Rules for Life by a psychologist called Jordan Peterson. I remember on one of my flights from Adelaide to Sydney, I actually left my book on the plane, and then I had to go back to the airport to Jetstar service desk, and I had to pick up this book again. And the lady at the desk said to me, like, no one ever goes back to pick up a book. Like, we have like a library of books because of people who left them on the plane. And I didn't even say anything, and the person behind me responded to her saying, this isn't just any book. This is an awesome book. And then I turned around, I was like, oh, hey, like, have you read the book? And he's like, oh, yeah. This book actually changed my life. So without overselling my own talk, I hope you all have the same experience tonight. It was a he. All right, let's start off tonight with a game. I'm going to say a line from a movie, and you guys have to guess it. Person one says, for your information, there's a lot more to ogres than people think. Who said donkey? That's not the name of the movie. Okay, yeah, it was Shrek number one. Let me read the rest of the script out, because you guys have already won the game. Shrek says, for your information, there's a lot more to ogres than people think. Donkey replies, give me an example. Shrek says, ogres are like onions. Donkey replies, because they stink. Then Shrek says, no, layers. Onions have layers, ogres have layers. Sometimes we too have a tendency to put up layers. The reason why I titled this talk is because there was once a stage where when people would put a photo up on like Instagram or Snapchat without a filter, they would, on the rare occasion that happens, they'd make it very well known and say, like caption it, say #NoFilter. So this brings us to 5 questions we'll try to answer tonight. Question 1, what does it mean to not know myself? Question 2, why are we not honest with ourselves and others? Question 3, how is this affecting my life? Question 4, what is the importance of getting to know myself? Question 5, how do I get to know myself and be honest with myself? So we'll start off with question 1. What does it mean to not know myself? We are in a day and age where it's so much easier to lack familiarity with ourselves. We can go our whole lives without knowing nothing about ourselves. There's this really cool study in 2017 which quoted that the average person spends 5 years and 4 months of their life just on social media. That's 3 hours a day and 45 days a year. So that's 45 days a year spent less with yourself. In the liturgy, just after the commemoration of the saints, Abuna says this very key line. He describes us as the foreigners in this place. And it's assumed in the liturgy that we are actually foreigners in this world. We are estranged to it. But it just so happens that we can be so accustomed and familiar to this world and actually be foreigners to ourselves. Abuna Lu'a Sidaros is a very beautiful priest who is a very saintly man who passed away recently. He said that when he was still a layman in his 60s, he went to a retreat in St. Isaac's Monastery for a week. And what he did was, he used to go to every single monk, chase them, and get like kilmat manfa'a, like a word of benefit from them. And he kept chasing this one monk, who turned out to be Abuna Feltaos Suryani, who's a beautiful modern-day saint who passed away a few years ago. And then Abuna Feltaos sat with him and told him, oh, like, what's your name? What are you doing here? Which priest have you sat with? And then Abuna Lu'a tells him, I've sat with this priest, sat with this, blah, 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 blah. And then Abuna Feltaos tells him, so there's this really awesome guy you still haven't sat with in your retreat. And then Abuna Lu'a is like, who is it? Who is it? And then Abuna Feltaos tells him, the most important person you sit with is yourself. This is the most important person that you sit with. And there are so many times where we fall prey to this, where we don't sit with ourselves. Like, before I get into the car, I already know what songs I'm going to play. Or I struggle to go to the toilet without having my phone in my hand. Or I can spend hours on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, but I can't spend 5 minutes praying. It's almost in a sense like we can't live our own reality. I remember when I was in the library with my friends studying at the end of last year, and there was this one magazine that caught our eyes, especially his eyes, because he's a bit of a gamer. It was a PC gaming magazine, and the motto of it, the slogan of the magazine was titled, "Escape Your World." And I just found that such an interesting slogan to sort of sell like a gaming magazine. Like, escape your world is becoming such an enticing thing. And this is exactly what the prodigal son did. So we'll go to our first reference, Luke chapter 15, 11 to 13. I think Joanna is just reading that. Do you need the mic? Should we give a mic? Sorry. You can start without it though.
Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living.
Yeah, we'll stop there. So, being in the farm every day was pretty boring for the prodigal son. He wanted something a bit different, a bit more of a hype to it, because it wasn't just exciting. It wasn't as exciting anymore. And it's sort of similar with us. Like, why would I study when I can just YouTube? Or like, why would I put in the hard yards and benefit from the long-term reward when I can instantly get something that can give me a bit of a kick? And this, in a sense, is distancing ourselves from ourselves, and it's quite emotionally unhealthy. There were these 8 indicators of what it looks like to be emotionally unhealthy that I read out, and I'm sure, and when I read them out, I'd hope you can see if you relate to them, not your brother or sister or parent. I'll read them out because I found that I could relate to a few of these too. The first one is, I say yes when I really mean no. Number 2, I get depressed when people are upset with me. Number 3, I have a need to feel approved by others in order to feel good. Number 4, when I make mistakes, I feel like I'm a failure. Number 5, I criticize others to feel good about myself. Number 6, I avoid looking weak or foolish for not having the answer. Number 7, I have to do something exceptional to feel alive. Number 8, I have to be needed to feel alive. This is what it looks like when you are not true to yourself. Question 2, why are we not honest with ourselves and others? I'll start off by talking about a few stories from the biblical text. So the first one is about King Saul. King Saul was the first king of Israel, and God told him to fight the Amalekites and to leave nothing behind. No one alive, don't take any of their possessions or livestock. His instruction was very clear. But then Saul decided to actually keep some of the best livestock. And when Prophet Samuel approached him after, like, why did you do that? He said to him, I feared the people and obeyed their voice. And this is the point 2 and 3 of being emotionally unhealthy. I get depressed when people are upset with me, and I have a need to feel approved by others in order to feel good. This is one of the reasons we aren't honest with ourselves, is that we are too dependent on other people to give us a sense of approval. The next story is the story of Adam, Genesis chapter 3, verse 9 to 10. Armea is going to read that out for us. This is just after Adam ate from the fruit that Eve gave him.
Then the Lord called to Adam and said to him, Where are you? So he said, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself.
So Adam, after eating of the fruit, now knows his nakedness. In other words, he knows his vulnerability, and he decided to hide from God who sees all things, like as if you can hide from God, but he tried to. And so what stopped him from being truthful is his excessive fear of vulnerability. And some of us can be really scarred from making ourselves vulnerable in the past. Like, if you've asked someone out for a coffee or a date and they reject you, that can be very scarring. If you or if, like, I was honest with my friends or parents and then and I felt like I was exposed, that scars you. And we often do the same thing as Adam. We are too afraid to make ourselves vulnerable, so we make these excuses for ourselves. That was his first approach, his fear of vulnerability. Tim will read out the second approach Adam took in Genesis chapter 3, verse 11 to 12.
And he said, Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you that you should not eat? Then the man said, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I ate."
So this is really horrible. So Adam, after he eats of the fruit that Eve gave to him, he just throws his beloved Eve, who is his soulmate, right under the bus. Is this like a touchy topic or? What? Okay. Everyone's like looking at each other like, hey, look at. Okay. Anyways, so this is really a seriously bad thing, like the disease of self-victimization. We point the finger at anyone else other than ourselves. The next reason why we aren't true to ourselves is that we want to be right. At which point in the story of the prodigal son did the son actually wake up from his sin? Daniel. Yeah. So because he couldn't talk to the pigs, he spoke to himself, and he came to himself. So that is the point where he actually woke up from his sin. So just to, he didn't notice his mistake when he left his family, went to a faraway country, or even when he lost his money, or even when he started doing really low, labor-based jobs that were very humiliating. It was at the point that he came to himself. He was quite a stubborn character, and took him a while to realize his mistakes. The next reason why we sometimes don't want to be honest with ourselves is we don't want to change. It can be the serious question is, why would I want to expose myself to myself if it means that I'm actually going to need to put in a lot of effort to work on myself? And in the story of Samson was in this really toxic relationship with a woman called Delilah. He was in a relationship with her just because she was attractive, and there was no other reason for it. And it was really toxic, and he'd tell her, she'd ask him, "What's the source of your strength?" And he'd tell her, and every time he'd tell her, the next night, there was somebody trying to, use his weakness just to get to him. And Samson, because of his strong dislike for change, he didn't want to, leave Delilah. That gave way to this incredible power of denial. He was just in denial that this woman is toxic and he should stay away from her. And sometimes we'll believe a lie so much that it will cost us a lot. And in the case of Samson, it cost his life. And so just to summarize, that some of the reasons we aren't honest with ourselves is because, 1, we depend too much on those around us to give us a sense of approval. 2, we have this excessive fear of vulnerability. 3 is self-victimizing. 4, we want to be right. And 5, we don't want to change. Question number 3. How is being dishonest with myself and others affecting my life? And so we just pull out the reference, Psalm 15, verses 1 to 2. So how is this going to affect my life? And the first thing is that if I'm not honest with myself, honesty with oneself is a prerequisite to enter the kingdom of heaven. And Amanda will read the reference.
Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle, who may dwell in your holy hill? He who walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart.
Yeah. So to enter the kingdom of heaven, this requires you to be honest with yourself. The second way it affects us is that it creates this sense of disconnectedness. When my actions don't follow my speech, it creates in me a sense of brokenness. And like Christ said himself, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. So if I'm telling my Sunday school kids, pray the Igbeya and don't swear, and I go throughout my week and do the exact opposite, it creates in me this sort of duality that is really, really, really toxic to myself. Or if I, tell my siblings to do one thing and I do another thing, or I'm trying to parent my parents and at the same time I'm struggling with more serious personal issues, then this is really, really hypocritical. And it is also, when you are putting forth a person that you aren't, it's actually quite draining. I remember this time when I was in a camp interstate, and the speaker got so, I know this person very well, and when he was giving the talk, he got very like he was just so different to how he usually was, and he got very emotionally involved to the point that he actually broke down and started crying in front of everyone, and it was Tim's laughing. So it's like, it's quite a draining thing when you're putting forth something that you're not. Like, God doesn't extinguish who you are. God blesses you, brings you to your full potential, and ordains you. And there's no benefit in disliking who you really are, because one of the greatest forms of loneliness is being uncomfortable in my own shoes. And if I'm uncomfortable in my own shoes, how can I then put myself in someone else's shoes? Or if I can barely be there for myself, how can I be there for someone else? The third way it affects my life is that it prevents us from growing. And this will be our next reference. I think Sarah, Proverbs chapter 28, verse 13. Oh, sorry, Mariam, sorry. I'm going this way.
He who covers his sins will not prosper, but whoever confesses and forsakes them will have mercy.
Yeah. He who covers his sins will not prosper. If I'm a defensive person, every time somebody will point out something I've done wrong, I'm going to overreact, I'm going to make a scene, and in doing that, I lose my opportunity for growth on a spiritual level and on a personal level. And so sometimes we can shield ourselves from the discomfort of being wrong, but this will really cost us a very important future. The fourth way it affects me is an expression that's called the expression that goes, "Empty vessels make the most noise." If we aren't facing ourselves daily, then there can be this tendency that we want to change the world around us. You know, you can see this sometimes in society when, like someone won't pick up their rubbish, but they'll be huge advocates for climate change. Or like somebody who doesn't love their family or friends and like very unloving, but they'll lobby for equality for every minority group. And I'm not saying that caring for equality or climate change is not important, but I'm saying we shouldn't be having sort of strong stances on large-scale world issues when we haven't dealt with the more serious personal issues in our lives. And in the book, there's a nice, this psychologist says that personal responsibility is always greater than the collective responsibility. And this is something that's quite familiar to us as Christians. And who's next? Naomi, Matthew chapter 7, verse 5. Christ says it himself in the Gospel of Matthew.
Hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye.
And then Sarah, Proverbs chapter 16, verse 32.
He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty. He who rules his spirit than he who takes a city.
So the starting point for my life, or if I want to make a difference, should always start off by removing the plank in my own eye and taking control over my own life before I start to want to take control over other people's life. How does this look like in a service setting? Sometimes this can look like, sometimes you'll see it, or like you may be tempted to like disagree with the head servant or with Abuna's decision, and you think you know better, but meanwhile you haven't attended like the liturgy for the past 3 weeks, or like you don't like how things are going at church, and like you're naming and shaming everyone, but you haven't had confession in God knows how long. And so people who, like, we should be very careful to try, when we try to reorganize the world, when we haven't set our own world in order. Question number 4. What is the importance of getting to know myself? Number 1, it helps you know God. St. Augustine says, how can you draw closer to God when you are far from your own self? And St. Anthony says as well on this, he who knows himself knows God. So the first and most important thing of getting to know yourself is that you know God better. Number 2, it helps you be a better person. in the first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, it goes through all the ancestors or forefathers of Jesus Christ, and it talks about intimacy. Like Matthew the evangelist writes about intimacy in a very interesting way. So instead of saying like Abraham loved Sarah, who then gave birth to Isaac, instead Matthew wrote Abraham knew Sarah, who begot Isaac. And so love was equated with knowledge. When I love someone, I know everything about them. I know their favorite food, I know their favorite color, I know their favorite drink, whatnot. And the same thing with ourselves. If I love myself, I will know myself. And not in a prideful way, but actually in quite a very humbling way, because I'm not loving just myself. I'm loving the person of Christ that is dwelling within me. I love the gifts that He has given me, and I accept the flaws that I have, and I'm working on them. And if we don't know who we are, that then limits us from knowing who we could be tomorrow. So we have to sit down and ask ourselves the important questions. What do I like? What do I not like? What do I avoid? What makes me feel uncomfortable? What do I congratulate myself doing? What do I want to hear from people? And once you can answer these sort of questions, you've only just begun to introduce yourself to yourself. The third reason why this is important is that it actually helps you to help others. I read a quote from the book that I mentioned earlier. Jordan Peterson writes, says, "There is little difference between standing up and speaking for someone else and standing up and speaking for yourself. Knowing how to embrace and love the sinner who is yourself is so closely tied with being able to love and embrace the stumbling and imperfect sinners who are around you." The way we relate to ourselves is the framework by which we relate to those around us. If I am hard on myself, I'll be hard on others. If I'm critical with myself, I'll be critical with others. And so the starting point is to first acknowledge who you are, what you're feeling, what you're doing, and then everything else can follow from that. Question 5, which is now the last focus question for tonight. It's probably the most important, which is, how do I get to know myself and be honest with myself? So finally, how do we actually do it? And it's in 5 small points, sub-points. I'll read them out and then I'll go through them. So number 1 is sit in prayerful silence. Number 2 is treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. Number 3 is accept criticism, even if it is harshly said. Number 4, reflect not on the what, but the why. And number 5, live a life for others. So number 1, sit in prayerful silence. So we said before that the turning point was when the prodigal son said, the prodigal son came to himself. He sat with himself and he started by stopping. Start by not having songs in the background. Sometimes not even a sermon, because sometimes the greatest sermon you can listen to is you're sitting in silence. Amber Yusuf says Abuna Anthony Messiah has this really nice recommendation. He says, divert daily, withdraw weekly, and abandon annually. Sitting regularly by yourself, sitting by yourself regularly in the absence of everything to attain just one thing. Because when we are looking to hear God's voice, His loving and chastising voice, sometimes it's like listening to a whisper amidst waves, because there are so many more louder noises that we can hear so much more often. It becomes so much harder to hear God's voice. One of the church fathers said, the day you do not sit with yourself, do not consider it a day in your life. And our church beautifully has a sacramental life which consists of confession, and a confession really builds this ability to sit with yourself and sit with Abuna, who helps you become accountable and be honest. And the next reference, who is Clara, John chapter 8 verse 32.
I speak what I have seen with my Father, and you do what you have seen with your father.
Sorry, I think I might have given you the wrong reference. The verse which I was looking for is, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So, sitting with God, who knows you best, He will inform you of who you are beyond what you see of yourself. There's a beautiful quote by a monk that goes, God is at the core, God is other than the core, God is within the core and all through the core and beyond the core and closer to the core than the core. Sitting with God does give you this spiritual insight. Second way of doing this is by treating yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. Has anyone here watched The Simpsons? Yes, no's, yes. Okay. There's a PG? Fair enough, I've never watched it either. There's this episode where Homer, who's the main actor, the main character, he's sort of this family man. He's a father to 3 and also a husband, and he makes these terrible decisions. And in one episode, he has this whole bottle of vodka and mayonnaise mixed together, and he drinks it completely, and then his wife Marge tells him that he shouldn't have done it. Homer, what you did is so silly. And then he says, that's a problem for future Homer. I'm so glad I'm not that guy. And so we too owe tomorrow's version, it's really smart, eh? We owe tomorrow's version of ourselves a lot of care, delicate care and attention today. Caring for ourselves as if we were to care for somebody we cared for, if that makes any sense. And we are instructed to do this. It's quite biblical. Like, we are the temple of God. We must take care of ourselves in the most unselfish sense of that. Christ tells us to be as wise, or in some interpretations, as cunning as serpents. Snakes, when they do something, they watch with great precision, and they don't allow their emotions to interfere with their objective. And so sometimes our emotions can be quite misleading, but on other occasions it can be quite revealing. And so it's good for us to sit down and actually explore why we feel what we feel. I'll skip that next point. Okay, number 3, the third way of getting to know ourselves. Accept criticism, even if it is harshly said. When St. Anthony the Great, the founder of monasticism, had just started his early years of monasticism, he was told by a woman who, I don't know, like she sort of didn't have the reverence to not bathe in front of him. He was told by her to, like when he rebuked her and told her not to do what she did, she told him, go, if you want to go and have a spiritual life, go into the outer wilderness. And St. Anthony the Great listened to this woman, and he did exactly as she said. And thank God he did, because that was really the beautiful roots of monasticism that we are benefiting from even till today. And so it's a matter of being straightforward. Don't overanalyze. Saul, who we spoke about earlier, when he was confronted about his mistake, he gave excuses. King David, when he was confronted by Prophet Nathan about how he shouldn't have slept with Bathsheba and murdered her husband, he straight away said, I have sinned against God. Being straightforward as to when you've fallen short and missed the mark. And you never know, because the person in front of you might actually be pointing at a personality blind spot. Something that you're completely oblivious to, but everyone around you is like, oh man, oh Tim, he's so loud, as if he doesn't know that. Like, he has no inside voice. Oh Tim, why doesn't Tim know this about himself? Like, sometimes there's always that, we always think of one person who's very oblivious to himself, but I think we all have personality blind spots. And it takes a lot of strength to uncover this truth. And it gives us, and when we do, we see it with much clarity. And if you are feeling disheartened or sad about this, the Bible is very promising, because it is full of very imperfect people. Like, Abraham lied, Noah got drunk, Jonah was semi-racist, and Elisha was depressed and suicidal. So if you're feeling imperfect, and when you realize your imperfection, just join the crew, because there are a lot of great people who are like you. Number 4, this point is actually in my opinion, the most important point in this talk, which is reflect not on the what, but the why. We always have this culture where we always asking the what, like, what do you do for work? What have you done today? And we don't actually think of why we do what we do. And it's so important to sit with ourselves and say, like, well, why did I say that? Like, why did I really say that? Why did I put that post up on Instagram? Like, why did I really put that post up? Like, why was I doing that? And we just need to ask more why questions. It makes us much more inward thinking. King David, who is said to have a heart like God, we honor him till today for his why questions. In the Psalms which we pray, he always asks God, like, why have you done this? Why have you forsaken me? And then by the end of the psalm, he's saying, oh, Lord, your mercy endures forever. Lord, you're awesome, you're amazing, whatnot. But he always asks the why. And there's a philosopher known as Friedrich Nietzsche. He says, he whose life has a why can bear almost anyhow. And this serves us the importance of asking why. The last way of being honest with yourself is living a life for others. If you, we find ourselves when we find others. I find myself in my service to those around me. And there's a beautiful quote by Mother Teresa which says, if you want to go and change the world, go home and love your family. This brings us to the end of tonight's talk. Honesty with yourself isn't something that comes overnight or with one talk. It is a very, it is a tricky thing, and it will always be a work in progress. And even if you don't make progress overnight, there's a beautiful expression in Arabic which I really like. The expression goes, when somebody doesn't do something successfully, they'll cheer that person up by saying, "Sharaf al-muhawla," meaning the dignity of trying. So even if you don't see the progress, your very struggle is very dignifying and honorable before God. When we are truly ourselves, we can then inspire the world around us. And the best version of you will always be better than your best copy of anyone else. This is who we are called to be. This is what it looks like to live a life without a filter, facing ourselves first so that we can face the world later. And I think we should end it there. Glory be to God forever. Amen. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a little question. Just a little one.
Little one.
You spoke about sitting with ourselves, and you spoke about obviously there being, all this noise and there being waves. Like, what's a starting point? Because obviously we can't just jump right and become like, these philosophers that sit hours and just contemplate. Like, how can we start that habit of quietening the surrounds and like being able to sit with ourselves?
Yeah. Abuna, would you like to answer? There's a very beautiful thing which is the outer affects the inner, and the inner affects the outer. Like, we don't have to start off by having a very still mind and heart. Like, that's not so much the starting point. Like, that comes with your labor, and that's the fruit of your labor. And I guess if I'm understanding the question right, it's a matter of like, how do you practically sit with yourself in prayerful silence? And I think for everyone it's very different. Like, for someone, it can be the importance of having a good setting. Like, there are youth who go to the beach or go to the monastery or go to a park and just sit in literally outer silence, which would bring forth the inner silence. But even if you have the outer silence, you can still be very busy in your mind. You know, Buna Lazarus, the ex-atheist, now amazing monk in St. Anthony's Monastery in the Red Sea, says sometimes he's in the desert and his mind can be as busy as New York. And so it's not just one or the other, it's both. So to bring forth the prayer for silence, you need to first start off with your outward side, which is maybe the setting, maybe what you, maybe it's praying with the Egbeya, the arrow prayer or the Jesus prayer. That is the outer as well as the inner. Like the inner silence comes with that. When you put in the effort, you put in persistence and consistency in your spiritual life, that all comes. But I think what bogs people down is not that the results don't come, it's the fact that the results don't come soon. And the results will come, and maybe if it's not visible to us, that inner and prayerful silence is a beautiful starting point, and it will come with time. That's my 2 cents on that. Do you have another question? No. The last time I gave this talk, there was a bit of an uproar in the question time because someone was very uncomfortable with the idea that you have to bear your own personal responsibility before you try to help someone else. And I'm interested to know, have I not explained that, or does someone disagree or have a different opinion? Oh, beautiful. Kelibu youth are beautiful.
Does anyone have an opinion?
Abuna is asking for it.
Before Daniel is going to give us a legal opinion, and that's probably not a good idea. I always say to people, it's if you can imagine yourself as someone who's climbing on a cliff and you're not at the top, you are still on the climb on the cliff. And this same idea of you need to bear responsibility for yourself. You can only carry yourself on the face of the cliff. The minute you try and help someone else out, your hands don't have the ability to lift anyone else with you. It is only after you've managed to get off the cliff and actually you're on the top, you're actually standing now over the side of the cliff. Only then, when you have your feet on the ground, can you extend your hand and help others. And very few of us are actually off the face of the cliff and are actually at the top. And this is where consultation with your confession father to try and really work out where are you on the cliff. Because if you're on the cliff, you shouldn't be trying to help anyone else. You should be really just focused on yourself. And that's not being greedy, that's not being selfish. That is actually being truthful with yourself. You can only carry your weight, you can't carry someone else's weight. And that argument always comes when, if you really, I can very easily describe the person that didn't like this argument. And they're usually someone who has a Muslim friend or someone who has an atheist friend. And they value that friendship a lot. And they say, what if I am the one that's going to bring that person to Christ? And I always answer them, what if it's that person that's going to really distract you away from Christ? Daniel? Not us?
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Tim.